everyone, I'm Courtney from Cake by Courtney. It's so fun to be a part of I Am Mom Summit this year and to teach you a little bit about cake decorating. Now, for those of you who don't know me, I'm a self-taught baker. I started my blog and Instagram just a couple years ago, and I've been just teaching myself through trial and error how to create recipes, how to decorate, make them look really nice, and just share all of that with you and hopefully help take the guesswork out of some of this for you so that you can do it at home just like I am. So today we're gonna be doing my oatmeal chocolate chip cookie cake. Brand new recipe I created because I love a good oatmeal chocolate chip cookie, and I have not seen that really in a cake. And you know me, I love to take fun flavors from other desserts, other treats, and turn them into a cake. So we're making a cookie cake. This one is delicious. But before we get to the cake and I start to stack and decorate, let me show you a couple of the tools I recommend to have for cake decorating. So the first one, a turntable. This one is a cast iron turntable. So it's two pieces, it's nice and heavy base. And it spins really nicely because it is the metal, there's nothing connected in there. So a turntable, this is a little bit of a plastic grip that will hold on to my cake boards. And I used two different cake boards. I have one that's larger, this is a 10-inch, and then I also tape an 8-inch board on top of that. The 8-inch board will always stay underneath my cake to just support it. But then this 10-inch board allows me to move the cake in and out of the freezer, which I'll be showing you later. We do that during the crumb coat, and then also when we put a third cake board on top to create a nice flat surface up top, straight sides, and I'll be showing you that. So cake boards, the turntable, and then a few decorating tools. This is an offset icing spatula. I have a couple different sizes, but I don't like anything larger than this one, and that's about a 6-inch icing spatula. Offset, this is what I use in the center of the cake and then also on the top. For the sides, I love a straight icing spatula. That one's also about 6 inches. And then this is a cake scraper. This is from Mateco. You need to have one of these. This is what you get the really smooth sides with, and I'll be showing you how to use that, the right angle to hold it at. So I would say those are like the top items you need. The turntable, some cake boards, cake scraper, and then some icing spatulas. Now, a couple other items that I love to have in the kitchen but totally aren't necessary. One is a cake leveler. So this has numbers on the side, and you line them up, and then you're able to just go right across the top of your cake if it's a little bit uneven or if there's a dome. Just go right across the top, trim it off, save those scraps, eat them, put them in a little cake jar. And then this is a cake lifter. Use this to slide it under the 8-inch cake board or the 6-inch cake board to separate it from the larger one, and that's how you would move it to your pretty cake plate. And then finally, a kitchen scale. I weigh out all my cake batter in the individual pans using a kitchen scale so it's nice and even when you're cutting into the cake. And also you can measure your ingredients on here. So that's just another tool I suggest having, but not necessary. And a couple more things before we start decorating. Just a few tips I want to give you for your actual baking process. So the first one, to make sure your cakes aren't going to sink, there's a few things you need to check. One is the expiration date of your leavening agents, like your baking powder and your baking soda. I give mine 6 months if I haven't used them up. 6 months max, because they'll expire and they're not their freshest and you won't get the beautiful rise that you need to get from your cake. So I write the date on the outside of the container when I bring it home from the store. And then 6 months after I bought it, even if I haven't opened it, I recommend getting a new baking powder, baking soda, your flour, because you want those at their freshest. The other thing to check is the temperature of your oven. Now I know it'll say what it is on the outside of your oven, but get an oven thermometer and put it on the inside, right in the middle of your oven, and check the temperature to make sure the internal temperature is actually what it's reading on the outside. Just a few degrees difference can make a difference in how your cake is gonna rise and how it bakes. So make sure the oven is at the right temperature, have the ingredients nice and fresh, and then the other thing, don't over mix your batter. I grew up on cake mixes from the store, and those ones always tell you to like mix the batter once you have the vegetable oil and the eggs in for, I don't know, 2 minutes on high. That is way too much. Do not do that with a cake from scratch. Once you add your dry ingredients to the wet ingredients, just mix it on low until things are incorporated. Scrape down the sides of the bowl, mix again on low for about 20 seconds, and you're good to go. If you overmix your batter, even with cookies and with brownies, it's gonna fall flat, it's gonna sink. So just short amount of mixing time with those dry ingredients, and once you get the wet ingredients. A couple other things I suggest: having your wet ingredients like your buttermilk, milk, eggs at room temperature. When butter's at room temperature, for me, that means I only take it out about 30 minutes before I'm gonna use it, and it's still cold to the touch and not too soft, especially important when we do our frosting. But room temperature ingredients, that just helps so all those wet ingredients and the fats and the liquids blend better together, and then they coat the dry ingredients better and more evenly, helping your cake to rise more evenly in the oven. Okay, write all that down, you get it? Now let's get hands-on with the cake. We'll get some close-ups so you can see exactly what I'm doing, but now it's time for the fun. Okay, so I've got my cake boards taped together, 8-inch on top of a 10-inch, and I'm gonna take a little bit of icing and just put it at the bottom of the board. Really smooth, not a lot, but that just holds my cake layer in place as I start to decorate. These cake layers I actually made yesterday, and when they were all cool, I trimmed the tops and I wrapped them in plastic wrap and I froze them overnight. That keeps them nice and fresh, and you could store them for a while that way. I'm just centering it on the center of the 8-inch cake board, looking around just to make sure it's about even. And there's a space now here between where the cake ends and the cake board ends, and that's gonna help me fill it in a little bit later. So the frosting on this cake is a chocolate chip cinnamon frosting, and I'm gonna take about a cup of frosting and put it in the center of my cake. You can also pipe frosting on. I just noticed that when I pipe my frosting on, I tend to use a little bit more, and I don't have quite enough for the edges. So I plan for about a cup of frosting between each of the 8-inch cake layers. If you're doing a 6-inch cake layer, you only need about a half cup to 3/4 cup of frosting between each cake layer. Now, as I spin my board around, I'm pushing the frosting out over the cake layers. This helps so that the frosting doesn't drag in the crumbs. And I'm actually just pushing the frosting over the crumbs. And as I add frosting to each layer, I want to get eye level with the cake to make sure it's nice and flat. When you're looking at it bird's eye view, it tends to always look nice and even. If you get eye level with it, you can really tell where it needs some smoothing out and leveling. All right, here's layer number 2. I'm putting that crumb side up, so anywhere that I trimmed off a little bit, I want that up top right now, and I'm gonna cover that with more of this chocolate chip frosting. Dollop it right in the center, and then I'm gonna push that frosting out over the crumbs. You want your frosting at a consistency that you never have to push too hard with your icing spatulas or your cake scraper, because if you push too hard against the frosting, especially when we go around the edges, it's gonna pull some of the cake away, and we don't want that. So let's check eye level. Looks great. Now our last cake layer is gonna go crumb side down. So the bottom of the cake is actually what we have on top. This is our smoothest surface, and that's what we want to do the rest of our frosting with. My next step is to apply a crumb coat to this cake. A crumb coat is just a thin layer of frosting that's gonna go around the entire cake and just lock in the crumbs. And we put it in the freezer for about 10 minutes to solidify the frosting so it locks in the crumbs, and then we can go over it with our final coat of frosting. Notice how I'm holding the straight icing spatula. I'm holding it vertically, but moving it horizontally and bringing the frosting towards me. I point this out because sometimes in my cake classes, I'll notice people holding it horizontally and trying to go up vertically. And that, as you can see, doesn't get you a really smooth surface here. We want to hold it vertically and then drag that frosting towards us, whether we're left-handed or right-handed. And look how thin that layer of frosting is. It's just to lock in the crumbs and be a good foundation for our final coat of frosting. This coat of frosting too, we don't want to use a ton of frosting on because no one's going to see it. We're going to cover it up. And it doesn't need to be perfect. It's just a functional step here as we decorate our cake. But it's such a necessary one, because if you don't set these crumbs in the frosting, you're gonna get crumbs in that final coat of frosting, and it will drive you crazy. After the crumb coat is on, I'm just gonna do one scrape with my cake scraper. Now I hold it and I try to have nice pressure from the bottom of my fingers to the top, so it's nice and even. And on this layer, I'm just going to rest the cake scraper on the 8-inch cake board because there's some room there and I want it to be nice and close to the cake. Then also look how close my scraper is to the cake. I want it hugging the cake as I bring the scraper around the entire way. So I start across from my body and I try to go in one motion, holding the cake scraper in place and doing most of the motion with my left hand. And then I'll just kind of drag it and bring it up. But look how much frosting I ended up taking off. You don't need that. And then I'll just drag in any frosting that might have popped up, but the top is pretty clean right now. But I'm holding this cake spatula, icing spatula, just nice and parallel to the cake and dragging in the frosting. Okay, so that's a crumb coat. I'm gonna put in my freezer for 10 minutes, let this set, and then I can finish my final coat of frosting. While my cake is sitting in the freezer for just a couple more minutes to set that crumb coat, let me give you a couple tips for your frosting. The first is you want room temperature butter, but room temperature butter is actually colder than what you probably think it is. I take my butter out of the refrigerator about a half an hour before I'm ready to use it in my frosting. It's still cold to the touch, and I can just barely put a fingerprint into the side of the butter. I don't want it too soft or too warm because then it makes my frosting too soft, and that actually won't hold as well onto your cake and ends up just kind of dripping and falling off. So room temperature butter is actually still cold butter. To soften it, that's when we put it in the mixer and we beat it for a couple minutes just on medium high. It will soften the butter without warming up the butter. Then we're ready to add in our powdered sugar. Tip number 2, your powdered sugar needs to be sifted. This is an American buttercream to get out any clumps and to make it look almost as smooth as a Swiss meringue buttercream. You want to sift your powdered sugar. So take the time to do that, gradually add it into your butter, and then tip number 3, use heavy whipping cream. Just a few tablespoons is all you need, but add that in. And then tip number 4, mix your frosting on medium high for about 5 to 7 minutes with that heavy whipping cream in there, and it's gonna lighten the texture, it's gonna lighten the color. It's just all around such a better frosting with a little bit of heavy whipping cream and taking the time to mix it a little bit longer. Tip number 5, last one with your frosting. After you've mixed it with your electric mixer, get a wooden spoon and mix it by hand to push out the air pockets that have been created by the electric mixer. And this will get you a really smooth looking buttercream if you take the time to mix it by hand as well, and then it'll go on your cake a lot smoother and look a lot nicer. So let me grab the cake out of the freezer and let's finish this guy. Okay, so my cake has been in the freezer for about 10 minutes and it is nice and chilled. The frosting's not coming off on my hands. So we've set our crumb coat and now we're ready to do the sides of our cake. To start with that, we're gonna put another cake board right on top. You could also use acrylic discs that are made for this, but cake boards are usually really easy to find at craft stores. And then I'm gonna get eye level with it so I can just line it up using my cake scraper to make sure I have about the same amount of space going around the cake and the edges of the cake board. Okay, so now that I've done that, I want to make sure that my cake board is on pretty flat. And if my cake is not flat on the top, which mine isn't right now, we're gonna create a flat top. So I can tell when I get eye level with my cake, this side is a little bit higher than this side. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna push my hand a little bit more on this side to pop up the cake board and even it out. So now I'm looking nice and level, and I'm gonna take my straight icing spatula and my frosting and start to fill in the sides. And I'm gonna kind of push up under the cake board so that it's supported over here where I need to create some height. And I actually have chocolate chips in my frosting. Okay, so now it's getting set up to look a little bit more even. And I'm just carefully and gently spreading more of the frosting all the way around the top of the cake so that the cake board up here is kind of glued into place and won't slide around so much. So now the top of my cake looks nice and even, and I want to finish filling in the sides. And I'm going all the way down to the bottom of the cake board and cover the bottom of the cake board with more frosting. Because I'm keeping the cake board on to support it, I want to cover it so we don't see it when we display it or we put it in pictures. Let's hide that cake board the best we can. Now that I've got a good first coat of frosting around the entire cake, I want to take my cake scraper and try to even it out and find out where I need to put more frosting. So again, I'm holding the cake scraper super close to my cake. And I'm going to try to go around in one motion by doing most of the turning with my left hand and just dragging the scraper gently around the sides. You don't need to push hard with this. Now, I kind of made it tricky with all these chocolate chips in here, but we just keep going around, and I'll do it again. Try it a couple times. I can tell I have a little more frosting on the bottom than I do on the top. So I'll scrape away a little bit more on the bottom and then add some more frosting to the top of my cake. And you just keep going around the cake little by little, adding some, scraping, adding a little bit more until you find that your sides look nice and even. But I'm not going to add everywhere. I just want to add some places that look like they don't have as much frosting. In between every scrape with your cake scraper, you want to clean this off so there's no extra frosting pulling away the clean frosting over here. So clean off your tools every time you go around scraping it. The other thing I like about the metal cake scraper is that you can run it under warm water, dry it off, and the heat from the scraper will help to manipulate this frosting and give you a nice, smooth surface. So my cake has been in the freezer for about 20 minutes, and you can tell the frosting is nice and set. So I'm gonna take just a small knife, and I like to find kind of an edge where you can kind of see where your cake board is gonna be. Run the knife underneath the board and basically cut it off. And I'm holding the back of the cake board with my hand so it doesn't just pop up on its own. It tends to want to do that. I am making it a little bit trickier because I added chocolate chips to my frosting. But it's gonna look cute even if it's a little tricky, but then it cuts it off, and I'm going to just kind of clean up little frosting crumbs or chocolate chips that are kind of in my way. I have this little area that kind of broke apart. We can now fix all of that by adding frosting on the top. And I just want to get eye level, but because my frosting is nice and chilled, I can just kind of clean it up with my fingers. So I'll spread this frosting out all the way to the edge of the cake and blend it in with the line of the edge of the frosting. And it's okay if I go over just a little bit. I can show you how to blend that in. But now any area that I had to kind of create a level surface with and fill in, I'm filling in those empty spots on top with the frosting. I feel like that side's just a little bit low, so I'm gonna add a little more frosting over there. Get an eye level, make sure it's nice and even on the sides and the top. All right, so now I've got a little bit of this frosting, hanging over. I'm gonna pull out some of those chocolate chips. I'm gonna take a clean icing spatula, just my offset, and I'm gonna run it around the entire edge of the cake. Because the cake is frozen, I'm not gonna have any problem going around the cake. It won't mess up the frosting that's already there. But now it's gonna blend in the side of the frosting with any frosting that came over the edge of the top. And just go it around a few times until that line is just blended in. Now we'll take the offset spatula again, and just to clean up these edges and keep that nice crisp, sharp edge, hold the icing spatula nice and parallel to the cake and just drag it into the center and wipe away the frosting every time. And we're just gonna use that edge and drag it in and keep that nice, sharp edge there. Then you can just touch up where needed. This side needs a little bit more. Now remember, it's buttercream. It's not gonna be as perfect as fondant. That's okay, we gotta live with a few imperfections. Okay, now we wanna add a drip to this. Now, this drip is just some heavy cream and dark chocolate chips, 1 cup of heavy cream to 1 cup of dark chocolate chips. And you can test it on top. Looks nice and drippable. And we're just gonna hold the bottle right to the edge of the cake, but not on the side of the cake. We actually wanna hold it, you'll see, on top of the cake, and just let the drip spill over the top and drip down the sides. The more pressure you apply to the bottle, the more you're gonna have the drip go down the edge. I like to be a little uneven with it. You just gotta go for it. You can't hesitate too much. And because the cake is chilled, it actually stops the drip from going all the way down. We're gonna add some more on the top to just fill it in and blend in with the edge of the drip. This is still warm, but it's not hot, but even the warmth of it is not gonna melt our cake because it's been frozen and the frosting is nice and cold. But now, because this drip is still warm, we don't wanna add any more frosting on top if you're gonna do any kind of piping until this is set. So you can stick it back in the freezer for a minute. But with the drip, you don't wanna go over a second time because you'll see the line going over because this has already started to set. So I'm gonna put this in the fridge or the freezer for a couple minutes, set the drip. Okay, last thing I'm gonna do is just sprinkle some chocolate chips around the edge of the cake on top. Just to add a little something extra. You could do some piping on top. This has already got a good amount of frosting, so I don't know that you really need more unless you just want the look of it. All right, here you have it, the final product. You guys, this was so fun to do with you today. Thank you for watching. I hope you got all the tips that you needed to feel confident enough to do this at home on your own. And if you have any questions that come up, email me, hello@cakebycourtney.com. I'm here for you, I wanna help, and I hope you enjoy this as much as I do, and the cakes and the flavors and just the hobby itself. It's so much fun to be in the kitchen and to create something like this that you can share with others. So I hope you love it as much as I do. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.